So thank you all for coming. It feels like it's been more than 2 weeks we've been away. Sometimes it feels like it's been a month, and then other times, like, didn't we just have it? Time is meaningless. It seems like, but we are back for our continued study in Isaiah. We are almost halfway through Isaiah, not quite there yet, but chapters 29 and 30 this week. And we'll see how far we get through. 30 is a little bit longer than some of the ones we've done in the past, but I think we can make it through from what I have. So let's start with a word of prayer to get us started. Dear gracious God, we thank you that you care so much about us, that you want us to know what's on your heart, and you want to find ways for us to connect with you and for you to connect with us. I ask that you be with those who, for whatever reason, cannot be here tonight, and just ask that you continue to put your healing hand of peace on each one of us. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 So before we start, just a real quick note in verse 29, it starts out with this woe to you. And I don't know what your versions say. NIV says Ariel. Another one said something about God's lion. Another one I saw said something about God's hearth. But this is a word that is only used in this chapter. It's not used anywhere else in the Bible. And so everybody agrees that it is representative of Jerusalem, but to what extent, whether it's supposed to be symbolic of the Lion of Judah and the seraphim that were on the ark, we don't know. Again, the only time this is used is in this chapter, but the El on the end is something that refers to God for Elohim. So it does mean Jerusalem. So like I said, I don't know what your version will call it, but this is not the Little Mermaid Ariel. This means Jerusalem. So who would like to start with us? Jeremiah 29, 1 through 12.
Isaiah.
I can do it.
Thank you, Ed.
Woe to Ariel, the city where David dwelt. Add year to year. Let feasts come around. Yet I will distress Ariel. There shall be heaviness and sorrow, and it shall be to me as Ariel. I will encamp against you all about. I will lay siege against you with a mound. I will rise siege works against you. You shall be brought down. You shall speak out of the ground. Your speech shall be low out of the dust. Your voice shall be like a medium's out of the ground, and your speech shall whisper out of the dust. Moreover, the multitude of your foes shall be like fine dust, and the multitude of the terrible ones like chaff that passes away. Yes, it shall be in an instant, suddenly, you shall be punished by the Lord of hosts, with thunder and earthquakes and great noise, with storm and tempest, and the flame of devouring fire. The multitude of all nations who fight against Ariel, even all who fight against her and her fortress and distress her, shall be as a dream of night vision. It shall be as when a hungry man dreams and looks, he eats, but he awakes, and his soul is still empty. Or as when a thirsty man dreams, and he looks, he drinks, but he awakes, and indeed he is faint, and his soul still craves. So the multitude of all nations shall be, who fight against Mount Zion. The next part I have here is the blindness of disobedience. Pause and wonder. Blind yourselves and be blind. They are drunk, but not with wine. They stagger, but not with intoxicating drink. For the Lord has poured out on you the spirit of deep sleep, and has closed your eyes, namely the prophets, and he has covered your heads, namely the seers. The whole vision has become to you like the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one who is literate, saying, read this, please. And he says, I cannot, for it's sealed. When the book is delivered to the one who is illiterate, saying, read this, please. And he said, I am not literate.
Right. So thank you, Ed. Does anything pop out about what Ed read for us? Anything come to mind?
There's some weird verses in there.
There are.
It's disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds to me like everybody is going to get punished.
Well, yeah.
But what specifically did they do to bring all this on themselves? And this is a heavy duty list.
So we'll get to some of that in the next chapter, but thinking of, why was God throughout Isaiah, why is God sending woes to his people? What are they doing that would bring God's judgment upon them?
Usually has to do with idol worship,
Right.
Worshiping other gods and setting up these Asherah poles and groves, and it was kind of always going on, it seems like, in ancient Israel.
Right. A lot of relying on themselves or people who are supposed to be their enemies to be their allies.
Right.
And getting their protection from them, right?
Yeah. Probably sometimes it's the priests that were corrupt.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
The chapter 11 or verse 11, where it talks about the book and then it's sealed.
Mhm.
I mean, I've talked about that in Revelation a little bit, right? There's a reference to a book that's sealed, Revelation or Daniel, maybe?
Yeah, Revelation 5, according to my footnote.
Okay.
I don't know the chapter off the top of my head, but yep, that's another one. And there's some debate. Some people feel like think that this is actually talking about the writings of Isaiah. So it's the idea of he's writing this down, but no one is absorbing it, the information. No one's really understanding it. You have eyes, but you're not able to see. You've got all these prophets, but you're not able to really internalize what God is saying. Because what's the point of God giving all these prophecies to the people? Is it for him to say, haha, I got you? Or is it that God has hopes that they will turn their hearts and minds back to him? Right?
Well, that's the ultimate of anything God does is, hey, how can we mend this?
Right. God is not vindictive.
No way.
Does God ever cause them not to comprehend what he's saying?
Well, I think so. Some of this, I think back to that idea of God hardening Pharaoh's heart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think I've mentioned this before. I've seen these things. So, okay, what you do with hot water, it's still the same hot water, but what gets put into it will change the effect. So it softens a potato, it hardens an egg, and it changes like a coffee bean, let's say. So is it the fault of the water? Or is it the makeup of what you're exposing it to?
It's the chef's problem.
Right.
So,
Well, it might not be food
Well,
that's getting changed.
The chef knows the response that he's looking for. How's that?
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
And, but again, there's still hope in these because we see that Isaiah is talking about Israel's going to have all these armies surrounding them and they're going to feel like they're living in a nightmare, right? This is where we get verse 7. You've got the hordes of all the nations are fighting against you. And it's like a dream, but then it gets flipped on its head because those who are fighting, they think that they're going to win this battle and they're going to get all this praise. And God's like, nope, you're going to come up empty because I got my people. There's only so much you can do. And so I think now, so let's go on. And this goes back to it as well. This is God talking to his people, specifically his quote unquote believers, his priests, like you were saying, Peter, maybe the prophets or the seers. And so let's do 13 through 21. And whoever's reading this as we're listening, think of today and how this relates to today.
I can do that.
Thank you, Jill.
Therefore, the Lord said, inasmuch as these people draw near with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but have removed their hearts far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the commandment of men, therefore, behold, I will again do a marvelous work among this people, a marvelous work and a wonder, for the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hidden. Woe to those who seek deep to hide their counsel far from the Lord, and their words are in the dark. They say, who sees us and who knows us? Surely you have things turned around. Shall the potter be esteemed as the clay? For shall the thing made say of him who made it, he did not make me? Or shall the thing formed say of him who formed it, he has no understanding? Is it not yet a very little while till Lebanon shall be turned into a fruitful field, and the fruitful field be esteemed as a forest? In that day the deaf shall hear the words of the book, and the eyes of the blind shall see out of obscurity and out of darkness. The humble also shall increase their joy in the Lord, and the poor among men shall rejoice in the Holy One of Israel. For the terrible one is brought to nothing, the scornful one is consumed, and all who watch for iniquity are cut off, who make a man an offender by a word, and lay a snare for him who reproves in the gate, and turn aside the just by empty words. Just to 21, correct?
Yes.
Just to finish the chapter.
It's the messianic prophecy there about Jesus.
So what will Jesus do?
Well, it reminds me of when Jesus was in the temple. They gave him the scroll to read from Isaiah, and the eyes of the blind will see, the humble will rejoice in the Lord, the needy will rejoice in the Holy One of Israel. I mean, that seems to be messianic prophecy there.
So why is it not like that? So why are the deaf still deaf and the blind still blind and the needy still needy when this is written, and even again now?
They didn't believe. They weren't faithful. They weren't listening to the prophets that God gave them and following his instructions.
The hearts were in the wrong place.
But they didn't know it.
Huh?
But I would say that their hearts were in the wrong place, but they didn't know it.
Yeah.
Right? Because they think they're worshiping God. They're honoring God with their lips. So they're singing the songs, they're saying the prayers. But their hearts, which when we think that, we often think emotion, but think of it with their minds. So their minds are far from God. One of the commentators I was reading was talking about how, back in the 1700s in the US and in Europe, it was the pastors and the politicians who were slave owners who were defending that, who were going to church. So it wasn't registering to them that they were not honoring God in the way that they were conducting their lives and their business, because they were being oppressive, but they were using actually worship and God as an excuse for their oppression. but in their hearts, they were genuine. So we have this some sort of disconnect. And I think that's something that a lot of people have today, whether they mean to or not. I actually last night watched a presentation put out about, you know, when pastors and leaders have a moral fall, it's often because they think this could never happen to me. And then once you get cocky, and you're stressed and you're tired and you're not taking care of yourself and your mind and your emotional state, it's really easy to mess up and then make excuses and rationalize it, right? And so what may have started out as a mistake then becomes an intentional whatever as you continue to keep and try to defend yourself. And I think we see that throughout history with Israel as well, right? Hey, I'm going to align myself with this nation because I think this will be a good idea, but it's not. So I'm going to keep making excuses for it. And then I'm going to dig myself in a hole I can't get out of. And in the process, I lose my conscience. I think back to in Exodus when the Israelites made the golden calf. They weren't worshiping some Egyptian god. They were having a feast to Yahweh with the golden calf as the stand-in for Yahweh, not as some other god. It's because they didn't understand.
Yeah.
What's going on in verse 14?
So verse 14.
The first part sounds like really neat, and then the last half sounds like just the opposite.
So therefore, once more, I will astound these people with wonder upon wonder. The wisdom of the wise will perish, and the intelligence of the intelligent will vanish.
So how is that a marvelous work?
Well, I think, so to me, what I think is, so we've been going over the Proverbs with 3rd and 4th grade, and true wisdom comes from above, right?
Right.
And true wisdom is from God.
Oh,
And,
okay.
Right. So if you think about it that way, and I don't know if this is the intent,
Yeah.
but this just because of what's going on this week for me, this is what popped in. You know, God's wonder and miracles are kind of what rebalances us and checks us. And that's where true wisdom is. So if you compare God's wisdom with the wisest man who's using, or wisest person who's using human wisdom, it's going to fail. And all human intelligence is nothing compared to God's intelligence. So that's going to vanish compared to God's. That's how I read that.
I have to do a summary for Thursday, which is Job. God answers Job.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the difference between human wisdom and God's. Oh my goodness.
Right.
It is amazing.
Ours is so limited. Even the wisdom that comes from God that we have is so, ow, stop it. I'm being bitten. And she just went in the soft part of my thumb with her back teeth.
Yeah,
So,
we got a nicer cat.
Yeah. Oh. All right. I don't think I'm bleeding. That's good. All right. But so my wisdom of having my cat play with me on my lap was very limited.
First Corinthians.
Thank you, Christy. That makes it a little more plain to me. I understand.
Okay.
1 Corinthians 1:25 says, "For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength."
Thank goodness.
Yes, very much so.
Gives us hope.
It does. And again, so what's the hope that comes with this idea of a messianic promise that we have? And, you know, the idea that ruthlessness will vanish. Do we live in a ruthless world?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
right? Mockers will disappear. We've got mockers and bullies and all of that everywhere, up and down. You look outside your window. Everyone who has an eye for evil will be cut down. These are wonderful things to look forward to, because that is not who God is. God is a God of justice and wants that restored. That's the true wisdom and the true intelligence.
I
And
think it comes down to, in here, verse 16, it says, you turn things upside down as if the potter were thought to be like the clay. So shall what is formed say to the one who formed it, you did not make me? Can the pot say to the potter, you know nothing? So I think it's kind of like arrogance and pride he's talking about.
Yeah. And arrogance and pride always get us in trouble, right?
Oh, yeah.
In the Message Bible, Peter, you'll like this in verse 15 and 16. It says, doomed to you, you pretend to have the inside track. You shut God out and work behind the scenes, plotting the future as if you knew everything, acting mysterious, never showing your hand. You have everything backwards.
That's good.
Well, and I think what goes along with that great is, throughout the Bible, and we see this a lot in church history through the New Testament, people thought that you needed to have this special knowledge that would make you holier to understand. And this whole offshoot of Gnosticism came out of that. And it's, oh, you think you know this special thing and you're privy to all this information. And it's kind of, and it is enticing. And it makes us proud and arrogant to say, oh, I'm privileged to have this information and understand this thing you can't. And that's also one of the reasons why conspiracy theories are so attractive. Because, oh, I have this special knowledge of this conspiracy that's going behind the scenes. And there was actually something on the radio, I think it was on NPR recently, talking about Gnosticism and comparing that to all of the conspiracy theories that people are obsessed with today that have nothing to do with God, but just all the political conspiracies and social conspiracies, because we want to be special.
Oh.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah. So if people are living in rampant injustice, and these are people in Israel living there, living in this and perpetuating this, the last part of the chapter, 22 through 24, gives us the fix and goes on with that idea. So who can read for us chapter 29, verses 22 through 24?
I can do that.
Thank you, Karen.
Therefore, excuse me, therefore, thus says the Lord, who redeemed Abraham concerning the house of Jacob. Jacob shall not now be ashamed, nor shall his face now grow pale. But when he sees his children, the work of my hands in his midst, they will hallow my name and hallow the Holy One of Jacob and fear the God of Israel. These also who erred in spirit will come to understanding, and those who complained will learn doctrine.
When it says no longer will Jacob be ashamed, is he talking about Israel?
Yeah.
More than the person Jacob, right?
Right. And we can see through Jacob's life how this happened. Jacob was a schemer. He was a thief. He was a liar. And he had to change his whole way of thinking by accepting God as his provider instead of thinking he needed to scheme to survive.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of people through the years in dealing with God, he put them on a farm to learn how to respect him and say, hey, this is the way it's going to be, you guys.
Yeah,
the tough father-in-law.
Well, the lessons in nature.
Look
Even the most tame animal, a domesticated animal, isn't always domesticated all the time, as my thumb will tell you right now. Yeah. So we don't have the control that we think we have. And we don't necessarily need it. That's also part of our problem, is we want to need this control. The other thing that I think is interesting at the end of this verse in 24, those who complain will accept instruction. Is it because the instruction isn't there? Is that why we keep messing up? Because God hasn't told us what we need to do?
Oh, he has told us, we just haven't wanted to listen.
Right.
It's been the harder way, or so it seems.
How many of us historically throughout our lives, maybe even up through today, love being told what to do?
Yeah.
I think sometimes we're all perpetual toddlers.
That's why it never bothers me when Jill tells me what to do at the food bank.
Well,
Me too.
I'd love to be told what to do. I'd like to just sit back and somebody tell me what to do and not have any more thought about anything else.
I just like hearing a voice.
It's better than being told where to go, right?
In the Message Bible, Christy, it says, those who get off track will get back on track. That's cool.
Yeah.
And complainers and whiners learn gratitude.
Mhm. And how do you do that? You
By good-
acknowledge
Yeah,
the holiness of the Holy One of Israel, the Holy One of Jacob,
right.
right?
Yeah. You become humble.
We need to stop considering ourselves God.
Mhm.
But that's our first parents. That's what they wanted to be.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
in our genes.
They wanted that special knowledge that only God had. Right?
What was that movie that it was like they were acting the part of God and they were getting all the prayers requests and all that stuff, and it was
Oh,
just,
like Bruce Almighty
Oh, was it
and
Bruce
Evan
Almighty?
Almighty. Yeah, there's a couple of them that were like
yeah,
that.
that's the part of God we don't want to be, though. That's the part we would, we want the power, we want the all that, but we don't want the compassion, we don't want the all those prayers coming our way. I mean, that's kind of the description of what Lucifer, he wanted the power, but as far as love and caring and compassion, that was, we're not so keen on that.
Yeah,
So
and
how about-
there's
Oh, go
there's
ahead.
actually a lot of caregivers, whether they be chaplains or nurses or whatever, suffer from compassion fatigue
Fatigue, yeah.
because
Well,
they're giving it so much that they shut down and they're not able to give compassion anymore. They've like reached their fill because they don't have an outlet on how to get refilled, or they're
Yeah.
just go. They're missing that rest that they need. Because
Yeah,
they're in a giving field, and so they feel like they can't take a break because, well, if I take a break, then who's gonna stand next to this person who's dying? And this is happening to our healthcare workers right now with this pandemic. They're in compassion fatigue overload. Yeah.
So how many of us would like to have God's special gift to Jacob? Lots of children.
Hmm.
Freddie isn't on the call.
Grandchildren, maybe.
Grandchildren.
Well, your grandchildren were considered your children in Bible time, so we'll give you that one, Jill.
God doesn't have any grandchildren.
Yes.
Oh, that's-
Mhm.
That is true.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of children, we're going to go over to chapter 30.
Oh.
And some of the same themes will pop up in chapter 30. We'll hear about pottery again, and seers and visions and prophets.
Can I make a request? When
Yes.
someone's going to read, can they tell us what they're reading from? And I can kind
The
of,
version.
The version?
the
Sure.
version, that would be good, yeah. Then
Okay.
I've got about 30 versions, so I should be
That's
able.
all?
Well, I have a little phone,
Oh, okay.
All right, so we're gonna just go through chapter 30, verses 1 through 11 is where we'll start off with. And someone like to read that for us?
I'll read it, 1 to 13, right?
Yeah, can you tell us what version, please?
Yes, it's the New International Version.
It's 1 to 11, right, Christy?
Yes, 1 through 11.
Do everyone have that? Or what, if you have King James, that's fine too. I don't care. I like to hear it, and I'm following along with a different version. It's kind of
King James can get a little bit clunky when you're dealing
Okay.
with prophecy.
All right.
So NIV
Okay.
is great, or even New King
Okay.
James.
Okay, all right, this is NIV.
Yep.
It's entitled Woe to the Obstinate Nation.
Hmm.
Woe to the obstinate nation, children, declares the Lord, to those who carry out plans that are not mine, forming an alliance, but not by my spirit, heaping sin upon sin, who go down to Egypt without consulting me, who look for help to Pharaoh's protection, to Egypt's shade for refuge. That was a long sentence.
Mhm.
But Pharaoh's protection will be to your shame. Egypt's shade will bring you disgrace. Though they have officials in Zoan and their envoys have arrived in Hanes, everyone will be put to shame because of a people useless to them, who bring neither help nor advantage, but only shame and disgrace. A prophecy concerning the animals of Negev, though a land of hardship and distress, of lions and lionesses, of adders and darting snakes, the envoys carry their riches on donkeys' backs, their treasures on the humps of camels, to that unprofitable nation, to Egypt, whose help is utterly useless. Therefore I call her Rahab the do-nothing. Go now, write it on a tablet for them, and scribe it on a scroll, that for the days to come it may be an everlasting witness. For these are rebellious people, deceitful children, children unwilling to listen to the Lord's instruction. They say to the seers, see no more visions, and to the prophets, give us no more visions of what is right. Tell us pleasant things, prophesy illusions.
Hmm.
Leave this way, get off this path, and stop confronting us with the Holy One of Israel.
Some serious stuff there.
Yeah, this Egypt, the Lord is not happy with, looking for help from Egypt. Egypt, at least in God's word, it has been a sanctuary at times, right?
Yeah, so there are
Egypt.
times that it has been this fortress of solitude. We'll talk Superman here.
Yeah.
Where Abraham was not necessarily told to go to Egypt when he went during the famine and made his mistake with Sarah and the Pharaoh, but he went there for that. Jesus was told to go. Joseph was told to bring Jesus to Egypt.
Yes, right, to kind of escape. And then for food, during the famines and such, but not to ever stay there or never to adopt their gods and,
Always a temporary thing.
Right.
And that's actually what got Israelites after Joseph. They stayed there for generations.
And it sounds like somebody must have gone there without God's permission, because they went there without consulting God.
Right? Can you think of
And
another?
they ended up enslaved.
Yes, and can you think of another time where the people wanted to go to Egypt and God's prophet said, "Please don't do that, sir." And the king said, "Forget you."
Was that Jeremiah?
That was Jeremiah. Yeah.
But what wasn't it also in Jeremiah where they were taken, were they overrun or overtaken, and God said, look, just plant vineyards, plant gardens, have family, have children. Was that in Israel when it was it the Babylonians that came in?
There's been a couple times that I've said, pray for the prosperity of the people who have captured you.
Captured you, yeah, right, exactly.
Because then that way you'll prosper.
Yeah, interesting. I guess it's time and place. It's.
Well, and we're going to get into this later. Part of what God asks for people is to wait and be content in waiting. And he must never be talking to me about that, because I am never content in waiting. That's not an acceptable answer for me.
In verse 3, it says that God's protection will be your shame.
Yeah. Pharaoh, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. So
Pharaoh's protection, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right. And this is actually referring back to Proverbs 9 or to Psalm 91. The idea of Egypt being a shade of refuge. In Proverb 91, God is our shade of refuge.
Yeah.
And they're saying, I'm not consulting God. I'm going to take these guys over there and I'm going to make them my refuge. And God's like, yeah, you know what? That refuge, that's your disgrace. Because that ain't going to do nothing for you.
Mm.
Big
Yeah, this is also our way of trying to fix a problem. You know, there's a problem going on. So, let's go to Egypt. We can get some help there rather than turning to God and like you say, waiting, being patient, having faith, and which is pleasing to God. But when we go and do the other thing, he mentions it 3 times about Egypt. I mean,
Yeah.
he just
we never have that problem. I can do
No.
it myself, God, you know?
And then again, we see this happening literally with King Hezekiah after Assyria. So for a while, they're like, oh, I'm going to be friends with Assyria. And then Assyria wasn't good to them. And they're like, okay, so now I'm going to be friends with Egypt because they're the enemy of my enemy needs to be my friend. And they're making these bad alliances. So some of this is literally going on when Isaiah is writing with the kings.
Isn't it amazing that kind of dynamic is still around today in the Middle East? It's almost a lot of things haven't changed.
There's nothing new under the
we
sun.
have enemies, straight up enemies, but we don't usually, side with another enemy because they're against, you know what I mean? That kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We don't seem to do that, but it seems to be still prevalent to this day in the Middle East. Just interesting.
Very
A
true.
lot of repetitive history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I liked your verse 7 when it said, I'll call her Rahab the do nothing or
Yeah.
something. That was pretty good.
Yeah. And so this is not the same Rahab
Okay,
as
so-
Jericho. It's actually spelled differently in the Hebrew. This is the Rahab that is often translated Leviathan, and it's used as Rahab in the Psalm. And so it's a metaphor for Egypt, this violent beast. And so it's just a do nothing. You think that this person is going to save you. So I'm going to go to Peter and I think Peter's going to save me. But God's like, no, Peter's just Peter the do nothing.
Mhm.
He's just
Yeah.
there to look good.
Because Rahab did something.
Right.
Well, in the Amplified version, she's been exterminated. Rahab, who's been exterminated, is the way it reads.
Oh,
Yeah, there's actually there's a Jewish commentator and translator, and he had a nice little spin on this. And let me look it up again. So if you do the spacing of these letters differently, because remember there are no spaces in Hebrew. So if you do them when it was written out, there's no spaces and breaks between the words. So if you combine a couple of them, reads arrogance for Rahab would be her arrogance has ended.
yeah.
So which is again, Egypt's arrogance will end.
The message says the last must be it's hard to tell what verse it is. I think it's verse 7, 6, and 7. Thinking you can buy protection from that hollow farce of a nation.
Mhm.
Egypt is all show, no substance. My name for her is Toothless Dragon.
Yeah. So again, that goes back to the Rahab Leviathan imagery.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for 10 and 11, I think again how people don't want to hear what God is really saying to them, right?
Mhm.
When God's saying, if you just listen to my instruction about the path I want you to go on, and they're like, I'm getting off this path. I don't care. I'm going to cover my ears and go la 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 la. I'm going to go my own way.
That was Jeremiah's kind of poor existence, was telling the people, and they said, no, that we don't like that. We don't like that what God's saying, so it can't be. And we'll chuck you in a hole, or we'll try to just discourage you. But even God told them at the very beginning, don't be afraid. I'm going to give you some hard messages for the people, but I'll be with you in the pit, wherever they throw you, I'll be there.
Yeah, prophets didn't always have a long life expectancy.
No.
Because if you're constantly confronted with the holy God of Israel and you have to see yourself in the mirror, it's not a happy image.
Hmm.
So
Should
it's
be,
easier just to cover if you are refusing to follow God's path,
yeah.
it's easier just to stop looking and turn your back.
In the Amplified, it says, speak to us pleasant things and smooth words, prophesy deceitful illusions that we will enjoy.
Mhm.
And I think you'll find a lot of this too in Christianity Today and in the famous preachers on TV who make lots of money.
Hmm.
You know, they're giving you the happy-go-lucky,
Yeah.
you know, if you follow Christ, you're going to get wealthy, healthy, wealthy, and wise. And they
If
miss
you
that
li-
whole.
If you listen to a lot of them, the whole sermon, you're lucky if you hear one Bible verse. They don't use it much.
Prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just,
And
just have more faith, give more money, and you'll have that Cadillac in the driveway, and you'll have that nice house, the white picket fence. Yeah,
Yeah.
if only that was the way it was.
yeah, and later on in this chapter, I don't think we're going to be able to finish this chapter tonight, but it talks about how we'll come back to it. Even when God's with his people, it says they will cry out and he will hear them and he will attend to them immediately. So they're still finding cause to cry out,
Right.
even though God is with them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, the saying that if God brings you to it, he'll bring you through it is
Mhm.
very true. But again,
Mm.
you go through it. You don't get rescued from it. I mean,
Right,
time and
right,
again, you see,
right. Right.
the guys in the fire, they had to go in the fire. Israel had to walk into the sea. They didn't get just
Yeah.
raptured over it and life was grand or whatever.
Mm.
It's
And Daniel had to go in with the lions.
exactly.
Jesus was in the boat on that stormy night, sleeping on the back of the boat. And you think, well, why didn't he just make it all nice, smooth sailing? But he
Yeah.
didn't. He just went to sleep, knowing that he was in God's care. And they're like going, "What are you doing sleeping? We're gonna die." These were seasoned fishermen. They were like scared to death.
But
Yeah.
even
But he let them go through it.
even the journey to the cross, Jesus did not get out unscathed.
No.
Yeah.
Right.
The
Yeah.
same thing happens when we're in a blizzard or around a tornado or a really bad storm. We can drive on the highway and our kids are in the back seat asleep, and here we're up there gripping the wheel like it's.
Yeah.
And they're not afraid because we're in charge.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. And it is in Isaiah, I don't remember what chapter, where it talks about God will be with you in the fire and in the storm.
Yeah.
So that is an Isaiah-ism.
I think it's 40 or 43
Is
or
that
something.
Yeah, somewhere.
Psalm 90? Was it Psalm 92? Was like that? It's that one about being on the flood and the fire, or maybe it's Isaiah. I thought.
Well, there's in that, and then Isaiah 91 is also one of the big ones about God's
Right.
provision for us.
Yeah.
And God being with us. So let's real quickly go and do Isaiah 30, 12 through 18, and we'll end with that today before we go into our prayer time, and we'll pick up this other section afterwards.
It's Isaiah 43 is what we were looking at. So anyhow, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
so
what was it again?
so that means we still got hope to wait for. Isaiah 30, 12 through 18.
18. I can do that.
Okay.
Therefore, thus says the Holy One of Israel. I'm in the New King James. Because you despise this word and trust in oppression and perversity and rely on them, therefore this iniquity shall be to you like a breach ready to fall, a bulge in a high wall, whose breaking comes suddenly in an instant. And he shall break it like the breaking of the potter's vessel, which is broken in pieces. He shall not spare. So there shall not be found among its fragments a shard to take fire from the hearth, or to take water from the cistern. For thus says the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, In returning and rest, you shall be saved. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength. But you would not, and you said, No, for we will flee on horses. Therefore you shall flee, and we will ride on swift horses. Therefore those who pursue you shall be swift. 1,000 shall flee at the threat of one. At the threat of 5 you shall flee. To you are left as a pole on top of a mountain and as a banner on a hill. Therefore the Lord will wait that he may be gracious to you. Was that it to 18?
18.
Oh, finished. And therefore he will be exalted that he may have mercy on you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are those who wait for him.
So there's that little indictment on me again at the end. I'm right by the fire station, so sirens happen often. So here we see again, when people desire to be God and choose their own way, what is God's desire?
Come, let us reason together.
Mm-hmm.
Return to me.
Yeah. But it says you would not, but you would not. It reminds of when Jesus was coming over the crest of the hill. He said, I would be like a mother hen gathering her chicks, but you would not, you know.
Mm.
It's strictly not God's problem. It's our problem. It's we have this tendency to want to go the other way.
Yeah, we build up a wall between ourselves and God. It's not that God builds it up for us. We
Right.
build up this wall
Mm.
because we think we're protecting ourselves.
Mm.
In the garden, who hid from who? In the Garden of Eden.
Yeah. You know, there's a saying that's going around now, and I can't pull it all together, but it lists several circumstances, but at each one it says, choose your hard.
Mhm.
You know, it gives 2 circumstances that are both equally hard, but basically you need to choose your hard. And we do see that it is hard, at least I'll speak for myself, to seem to choose what is right. We know that it's hard for us to give it up to Jesus. I'll put it that way. But there is a hardness or difficulty to it, or else we would do it easily and all the time. We get in the way of ourselves, but it's not something that's a path of roses and easy to do and comes naturally.
Yeah, that's what I see too in verse 15. Repentance and rest are our salvation. And you would think that rest would be easy, but it
Mhm.
is not easy to
True.
rest, you know,
You
and
have to work at rest.
we do. You know, we are, especially in Western society, we are trained go, go, go. We have the least amount of vacation in any major country,
Yeah.
right? And we even half the time work during our vacation.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
we don't know
That's the fault of technology.
even prior to
It
that,
never
right?
can get away.
But we have a hard time resting because we are taught so much about our worth being put into work. And there's a lot of prejudice against those who don't work for whatever reason. Quietness and trust, again, we have to work at trust. That's hard, especially if you're trusting and your circumstances aren't changing,
True.
right?
And it's hard. Talks about quietness.
Mhm.
You know, like the article you shared for Sabbath school, you know, about the person who is in the wrong always seems to get away with it or whatever, but it's the person that is the wrong, or the person, the loudest people are the ones that are agitating, and they're on the fringes for the most part, but those are the ones that get most of the energy,
Mhm.
drain most of the energy. You know, the people in the middle who are good folks and going about and doing everything, you know, putting their head down, just doing what's right, you know, nothing they don't get any, I don't want to say, it just
It-
seems to put a lot of energy in the agitation on the far ends of the extremes all the time, and they really amount to nothing, but oh my goodness, they're the ones you hear.
Well, that's just like you can have an experience and there are 99 people who are satisfied with an experience, and then you get one negative, and how many people are going to actually give you feedback? It's the negative feedback you get, right? I think
Yeah.
of those numbers on the back of a truck, how am I driving? How many of them are like, this guy was so respectful, he moved over, it was time for me to merge? They're never
Yeah.
getting that call.
I've called those numbers a few times. I said, not good.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
They don't get any good calls.
Yeah.
And we know that when our mind is not busy, it's a great time for God to reach us, right?
Mm.
And quietness is hard. I remember one of the singers that I really loved when I was in college. There was this part of her song that talks about us being uncomfortable in silence, and there was literally silence built into the song, and people would thought their radios were broken.
Oh,
Because she stops everything, no music, no nothing, and it just shows how uncomfortable we are with silence.
In the Amplified Version, it says, in quietness and confident trust is your strength.
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we see that too sometimes. Some people who are very quiet and they've got that quiet strength and they don't say anything, but when they do have something to say, ooh, you better listen. My uncle's been described that way. He's not one to just keep chattering on, but if he talks, you listen.
Yeah.
Well, right after it says, in quietness and confident trust is your strength, this says, you are not willing, and you said no, and we flee in our cars.
Mhm.
Well, it says horses, but that's
Yeah.
cars today.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, fine, we're gonna go on the Porsche now because
Yeah.
my little Volvo doesn't cut it.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I'm going to end on hope because that's where I like to end. For 18, even though we are stubborn and petulant, God wants to be gracious to us. Sometimes we get in God's way, but compassion and justice and patience are hallmarks of who God is. And I am so glad of that.
Mhm.
The last few words in the Amplified Bible is really good.
Mhm.
Since blessed, happy, fortunate are all those who long for him, since he will never fail them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cool words.
When we see with God's eyes the situation, we realize that we are
Yeah.
never abandoned and God does not fail us,
Mhm.
no matter how many times we fail God.
Thank
Right.
goodness.
Yes. Any last thoughts before I stop recording and put us into prayer time? All right. Let us